Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
Depeche Mode, the podcast. I hope you're having a great week. My name is Jon Justice, for those that are unfamiliar. There was a comment last week, made me laugh, on YouTube. Somebody had just posted, "What the hell is this?" It's a podcast where a lifelong Depeche Mode fan talks about his love of Depeche Mode weekly. I'm not sure what else you're looking for. It's always weird, just the random comments that people leave. I could probably, you know what? I should compile them and then just do a completely separate podcast and just call it, random YouTube comments to the podcast that I do. So, but this is a Depeche Mode podcast, so we'll focus on Depeche Mode this week. David Lynch was a Depeche Mode fan. I was completely unaware. There's a brand new interview that Martin did with a lifelong friend. No good Depeche Mode information in it, but it wasn't the purpose of the interview, but I'll share some details. Also found an interesting article looking back at Counterfeit, Martin's solo album, which I remember at the time was a major deal as a Depeche Mode fan. And I don't think that we've spent a lot of time talking about it on the show, but I found an interesting article from Sideline that I'll be sharing with you on the episode, and I got a lot of emails this week. It's interesting to me, and I can't put my finger on it. Some of the podcasts gain a lot of attention where other ones don't, and like last week, the last week's episode was not particularly special by any stretch. And yet it was certainly the biggest episode of the past 6 months. It was really, really strange. I have no idea. If I did, I would do whatever I did on last week's episode more often. But thankfully, it resulted in a lot of emails from you, which I'm very much looking forward to sharing on the show. So let's go ahead and get to it. A dear lifelong friend of mine is a huge David Lynch fan. So my heart went out to him as well as the loved ones of the eclectic filmmaker. Word of his passing last week, and came to find out that he was actually a big fan of Depeche Mode. I grabbed a snippet from an article talking about his love of music, and specifically, they put together a playlist of all the songs, of his top songs, as done by David Lynch. There is a Depeche Mode track on it. I'll share with you what it was, but I grabbed the one portion of the article where it briefly mentions Depeche. It talks about working in the past, David Lynch working in the past with the Pixies, Bjork, David Bowie. Lynch worked with him on Walk in Fire. They're all mentioned as serial sources of inspiration for the director. And whether it be within his music or his screen artistry, music influences the entirety of his work. The show also saw Lynch profess his love for Depeche Mode, which may come as a slight surprise for fans. Listen, it only came as a surprise for me because I had never heard that before. Being familiar with David Lynch, it doesn't shock me in the least bit that he's a fan of Depeche Mode. If somebody had said, "Do you think that David Lynch is a fan of Depeche Mode?" I would have said, absolutely, David Lynch is a fan of Depeche Mode. I just didn't know he actually was a fan of Depeche Mode. Also talks about his love of Bob Dylan, never been afraid to share his thoughts about the iconic songwriter, and even covered his song, The Ballad of Hollis Brown, on his record, The Big Dream. So the one track from Depeche that was listed in his playlist was a stripped. And I remember right after word of his passing, relatively young, I believe. I think he was only 78. Seeing an article pointing to his fandom of Depeche Mode and specifically Black Celebration and Stripped. So I felt so bad for my dear friend who was such a fan of his. And I like some of what David Lynch had done. Some of it got a little bit too strange. Didn't particularly care for his version of Dune. But some of those films growing up that David Lynch, Blue Velvet specifically, I remember those had a major impact on me as a younger person and a, budding Depeche Mode fan at the time as well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the interview that came out this past week with a lifelong friend of Martin Gore. I'm working off of an article here from Sideline. From Schoolmates to California, Martin Gore, Depeche Mode, and Dave Huxtable on languages, music, and friendship. So the Sideline author writes, yesterday our Norwegian correspondent, Jan Ronald Stange, shared a video forwarded to him by John Erik by Johansson. I assume these are all from individuals from Sideline. The video featured a conversation between two childhood friends now living in California, Dave Huxtable and Martin Gore. Dave Huxtable is passionate about languages, pronunciation, and accents. He invited Martin to join him for a video on his YouTube channel. The channel itself covers linguistic topics in a fun and engaging way. I've known Martin Gore since before he started Depeche Mode, Dave says. We both loved learning languages in school and bonded on exchange trips to northern Germany. In this video, we talk about those memories and how living in California has changed our English. Now, the video shows how Dave and Martin, this would be Dave Huxtable, connected at school through their shared love of foreign languages, especially during German exchange trips. They also recalled the challenges of learning languages in a school environment where authentic pronunciation often drew teasing. Now, in the video, Martin also shares stories from his time living in Germany in the mid-1980s. He explains how living there improved his German, especially through his daily conversations with a builder named Werner, who didn't speak a word of English. Yeah, as the story goes, as Martin told it, Martin was dating, and I think he said this was around 87, so it makes sense. It tracks in terms of Some Great Reward. And he had broken up with his girlfriend. I guess they left on amicable terms, but he had broken up with his girlfriend, and he moved to a flat around the corner. And I guess his ex-girlfriend now had put him in contact with this builder who he ended up, sharing a space with. And as it says in the article, didn't speak a word of English. The two also discuss differences between the British and American English, including why Martin prefers singing with an English accent. The interview is, of course, more a friendly chat than an actual interview, filled with memories from milking cows to funny language mishaps and observations about language quirks in the U.S. and U.K. So there is no Depeche information in the interview. And, you know, as a Depeche Mode fan and a Martin Gore fan, but not necessarily a fan of linguistics and language, I found watching the interview really kind of, funny may not be the right word, but they're recording this interview in Martin's studio. And so as a Depeche Mode fan, and as I talked about extensively last week, that would love nothing more than to interview Martin or Dave, I'm struck and I'm chuckling to myself that, you know, this is a lifelong friend, so it makes sense. But here you have this essentially untapped, for the most part, you know, time with Martin Gore, you know, and this lifelong friend gets to sit down on a YouTube video and just talk about language for 40 minutes. It made me chuckle. I was like, does Dave not have any questions about Depeche? I guess he's not interested. It's a language and linguistics YouTube channel, so his core audience, well, no, I would think his core audience probably has some Depeche Mode fans as well. So I just found the whole thing comical. Like, I wasn't annoyed at all. I just was like, wow, somebody has this amount of time to sit down with Martin Gore, who, you know, typically doesn't, you know, has been very vocal about not liking to do interviews. Probably really enjoyed this interview. Martin did, because it wasn't about Depeche Mode at all. I just found the whole thing funny. So if you have the time, you know, you want to go check it out. Just understand that, you know, if you're there to watch Martin Gore answer questions about language and talk about some stories from his childhood and around the era in which Depeche was recording without talking about Depeche Mode, then you'll get a kick out of it. Now, speaking of Martin Gore, Sideline also put out another article that I wanted to share with you this week. Martin Gore's 1989 debut solo EP, Counterfeit, Revisited. And I specifically remember this 1989 release. So, you know, you're coming off of Music for the Masses. You're coming off the tour. You're coming off of 101. We're ahead of just slightly, right? Because we were getting a lot more releases during that era of the band than certainly we have over the past, 20 years or more at this point in time. And so to get anything new from Depeche Mode or any member of the band was a major deal. You think about what Alan Wilder did with his Recoil project. And so, coming off of just the mammoth success and reaching the height of popularity prior to Personal Jesus and Violator coming out, and Martin releases this solo album. And I remember just how excited I was, not even realizing at the time that these were covers. I mean, I think it took probably a few listens, even though I went into the liner notes, which I remember were rather scarce, before I even realized that these were covers, because these were cover songs that I had never heard before. I was not familiar with even the bands themselves, apart from Sparks. I was not all that familiar with. But in that moment of time, treating Counterfeit in the same way that I would treat a traditional Depeche Mode release, where you would just go over the sleeve design and the liner notes and just how exciting it all was. And it is a nice little EP. There's some of those tracks are, Compulsion and A Matter of Speaking, Gone. I mean, those are really nice tracks. I prefer the first Counterfeit over Counterfeit 2. I enjoy some aspects of Counterfeit 2, but I don't know, the vibe of that album never quite connected with me in the same way that the first Counterfeit did. The Sideline article goes like this: everyone has a preferred Depeche Mode, Recoil, or Martin Gore album, EP, or single. Today we revisit one of the less commercial pearls, namely the debut solo studio release by Martin Gore, the Counterfeit EP. Following the extensive recording and touring for Music for the Masses, Gore, the primary songwriter and founding member of Depeche Mode, sought a more intimate creative outlet. He selected lesser-known tracks that had inspired him, aiming to pay homage while infusing them with his own unique style. It's not surprising that the EP name Counterfeit played on the idea of recreating or counterfeiting original songs with his own voice and sound. For the recording, Gore worked exclusively with Rico Conning. Rico Conning, a British musician and producer, engineered and co-produced the EP alongside Gore at Sam Therapy Studios in London. During the recording process, the duo used a blend of synthesizers, drum machines, and live instrumentation. The EP features 6 tracks, each a reinterpretation of a song from a different artist. So you have Compulsion by Joe Crow, In a Matter of Speaking by Tuxedo Moon, A Smile in the Crowd from the Darude column, Gone by the Comsat Angels, Never Turn Your Back on Mother Earth by Sparks, and Motherless Child, a traditional spiritual. The Counterfeit EP was released on June 12th, 1989 by Mute Records and was quite well received by both the press and the Depeche Mode Black Swarm, as they write in the article. Commercially, the EP was modestly successful and up until now still has a niche appeal. A follow-up cover album, 2003's simply titled Counterfeit 2, the band's Martin Gore covered on Counterfeit 2, Blind Willie Johnson, David Essex, Hank Thompson, Julie Cruz, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Brian Eno, Kurt Weill, Maxwell Anderson, John Lennon, Hildegard Neff, Iggy Pop, and the Velvet Underground. Now, there were tracks that didn't make the cut on the initial EP. The Counterfeit EP holds 6 tracks, but he at least recorded 1 or 2 that never made it on the EP. For instance, there's a cover of Down in the Boondocks. And actually, I know that was released as a bootleg. I have one of those bootleg compilation CDs, and I have which I quite enjoy. Originally written by Joe South, popularized by Billy Joel Royal in 1965. Gore's rendition, also recorded around 1989, was intended for the Counterfeit EP, but ultimately remained unreleased officially, that is. As I mentioned, that was available up on bootlegs. He also recorded a cover of I Love You, Love Me, I Love You, Love Me, Love, originally performed by Gary Glitter in 1973, and I think I have that one too. This rendition was also not officially released, but has surfaced on bootleg compilations. Not sure this track was intended for the Counterfeit EP, though. And I need to go back and find... I know where they are. Actually, they're just in the storage space here, just to my left in my studio / room. But I need to dig up those bootleg compilations, because I remember that there were some demos on there, specifically of Here is the House, that I wouldn't mind going back and revisiting, considering the fact that the lyrics were different on the demo than they were the actual song on the album. Getting back to the sideline article, that Gore likes doing covers is an understatement. During the late 1990s, Martin Gore engaged in informal piano sessions at hotel lounges following certain performances. These impromptu gatherings feature Gore playing piano renditions of both Depeche Mode tracks and various cover songs. Included were covers from ABBA, Elvis Presley, the Rolling Stones, Mac Davis, Mark James, David Bowie, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, OMD, Leonard Cohen, the Beatles, the Skyliners, the Doors, John Paul Young, Oasis, the Sex Pistols, Martin Gaye, and so on. These sessions were typically attended by small groups of fans and friends, and several recordings of some of these sessions have purchased. And I have a disc of those somewhere as well. And I'll add this, just based off this article, got me thinking, I'll add this to the list of questions that I would love to go and ask the band. And I've made mention on this on a previous podcast, it was a long time ago now, but that I'm always interested I would be very interested to pick both Dave and Martin's brains over the fact that they have such eclectic music tastes. Not mainstream by any stretch. And even when you consider, like, the music that Dave has done with Soul Savers, it's not very pedestrian, for lack of or accessible. It's not very poppy, not very catchy, which is, counter to much of what Depeche Mode does. And a lot of the music that they cite as being fans of and they grew up with, or the tracks that ended up making the cut on both of Martin's solo cover albums. Again, these aren't typically sort of your mainstream bands or songs. And I'm not even talking like popular music. I just mean, songs that may not have been hits on the radio, but that people are still familiar with, are the same thing as it relates to bands. And yet they make this music that is so accessible. Now, granted, I'm sure that people that are unfamiliar with the band, if you were to play certain tracks by them, would be scratching their head going, I don't get it, I don't understand. A song like I Want You Now or Pipeline, To Have and to Hold, right? I mean, these aren't straightforward pop songs by any stretch. You play them, some of their more popular singles, and that would, track with a lot of people. And yet, those most popular songs, the ones that make up the majority of the playlist, of the set list at their concerts, they really are far off the beaten path of the music that they seem to enjoy the most and inspire them. And I just always found that contradiction really interesting within the band. So I have a clip that I play on my weekly radio show. It's this woman in an interview with Anderson Cooper saying that you're fascinating to talk to. And typically I use it on my radio show when I've gone off on kind of a random tangent. If I had that available right now, I absolutely would have played it. Maybe I've answered my own question as to what that person wrote on YouTube last week, asking, what the hell is this? Stream of Consciousness Depeche Mode, the podcast. Let's get to your emails this week. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. First, Peter from Stockholm, Sweden. Stockholm, Sweden. Just amazes me. People from all over the world. It's incredible. I love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. Thanks, John, for the nice show. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate you reaching out. Question about a question to DM. In the Swedish pop magazine OKEJ, I don't know how that would be pronounced, but OKEJ. There is a DM article in issue 16 of 1985, and on page 4 it says, we have about half of the songs ready. What remains is to write 20 more and then record all 40. After that, it is time to start to choose. A tough job, says Andy. So OKEG is visiting DM at Streatley west of London when they are recording. It's called The Heart at Genetic Studios. This is part of what was written in there. And then in issue 19 of 85, page 13, it says, we write at least 40 songs, says Martin. In the studio, we record all of them, and then we pick the very best. It's a ceremonious process, but it gives the best result. My question, and I'd never heard this before, so this is all brand new information that the band would record that many songs. My question is, are there actually songs written and recorded by Depeche Mode in 1985 that we still haven't heard, even if the songs are abandoned? If they still exist, I think it could be pretty interesting and good because they are, in that case, written in the golden era from the mid-1980s. We can always fantasize. Keep up the great work. Best regards, Peter Schwab, Stockholm, Sweden. Yeah, so listen, I would love to appeal to you who have better knowledge of sort of the recording process. Beyond what I know from just reading the books and watching the documentaries, I had never heard that they had recorded this many tracks and then they would comb through them. If that is the case, 40 seems like a lot, but if that is the case, my gut is that a lot of these songs kind of entered in a demo stage and didn't get to a fully produced stage, which makes those 4 unreleased tracks that we will eventually get from Memento Mori, right, so special, because these are tracks that were essentially fully produced for the album, but for whatever reason it was decided they would not be included. Typically your B-side, although something tells me that these 4 tracks are unique unto themselves, which is why they're being, we haven't heard of them yet. They're being held, sort of close until we officially, get them released. And we'll eventually hear these 4 tracks. But again, they end up becoming B-sides just like you would off of any other Depeche Mode album. But I would imagine that a lot of these tracks, if they sort of enter into the recording demo phase, and if they're immediately abandoned because they're not working, I wonder if the band just simply doesn't go back and revisit them. Well, we had our time with them, they didn't work, and they didn't work now, they're not going to work later. Because I think a circumstance like a song, for example, Slow from Delta Machine, that was, excuse me, initially for Songs of Faith and Devotion. I don't know if I can think of another example where a holdover song, went that long and it ended up on another album. I don't even know of any other song that I can think of, and maybe you do. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube and ask what the hell is this. But I don't know of another example I can give of a song that was meant for one album that ended up on a different album. That's an interesting question. Steve Lank writes this. A question I would like to ask the band is, what is their favorite song to play live, and what song from their back catalog would they like to play the most that they have not played before? As far as the best remixes, I also love Shake the Disease, Edit the Shake, but my favorite would have to be Get the Balance Right, the combination mix. I also really like Never Let Me Down, the Eric Pride's remix. Yeah, we have when I get to more of the emails here, we got a lot of emails of people talking last week about their favorite remixes. And as a matter of fact, excuse me, I've been talking all morning. This email just came in from Danielle Monet, who writes this. I was listening to last week's podcast, and here's my answer for a favorite remix. I know I've sent you an extensive list of my favorites a while ago, but one that always stands out for me is Get the Balance Right, the combination mix, which I believe pops up on a few other emails as well. So Steve and Danielle, thank you both for the email this week. Let's see. Matt's from Music writes this. I have a question. Why don't they put their best songs on the albums? They have consistently hidden away great songs, either as B-sides or released them on the deluxe version of the album, or just not included them on the album, period. And they've done this from the very start. Ice Machine, Television Set, Shout are all great songs, or Oberkorn, especially the extended version with that Kraftwerk-ish arpeggio. I don't know if I'm saying that right or not. just glorious. There are so many examples of this throughout their whole career. It must be done deliberately, but why? From their later albums, Ghost, I was just listening to that the other day, is a perfect example, or the deluxe version of Delta Machine. Before I go further with Matt's comment here, let me add something to this. First off, I was listening to Ghost the other day. As a matter of fact, it was last Friday. I know this because I was driving back from... Man, voice is scratchy today. My apologies. I was driving back from getting the Friday night Costco pizza. Anyway, another one for a future episode, but Depeche Mode's Sexiest Song. And when I say that, I mean the one that's most explicit. Okay? I mean, immediately, Sea of Sin comes to mind. Sea of Sin and Ghost. Ghost takes the cake over Sea of Sin, by the way. I mean, you want to talk about being direct in terms of the lyrical content. I mean, I think Ghost from the B-side from Sounds of the Universe really, I mean, Phantom in Your Fingers, Voice Inside Your Head, Staying in Your Bed. I mean, come on. That song left off the album only because Martin was being so direct. Depeche Mode's Sexiest Song. And I mean, again, most explicit. What's their Triple X song? I don't want to go that far. Listen, Matt, in terms of your why do they consistently hide away great songs off the album or release them on deluxe versions, I think it's all subjective. I think if you were to ask the band... My guess would be if you were to ask the band, they would say that the songs they included on the album they personally thought were the best songs, and the B-sides didn't go on there because they didn't think they were as good. So it's subjective for a lot of people to say they like the B-sides more than they do the album tracks. The one album that sticks out the most that has that, where I recall people consistently talking about the B-sides that weren't put on the album that should have been, were those that came with Delta Machine. I think there was Delta Machine is such a I want the backstory on the making of that album and Spirit, but Delta Machine, especially since we got those demos and the music was so dramatically different in the demo than it was the actual album version. It's very strange. All right, let's go to Travis, who writes this. I was listening to your podcast this week, and at first I was annoyed when you said you had information but couldn't share it. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I did feel bad about that. But again, I just wanted to share that I knew things that I couldn't share with you. And when I know more, I'll tell you. So, and by the way, a lot of people have been trying to guess way off the mark. Some people keep saying Alan's coming. It has nothing to do with Alan. There's nothing to do. It's nothing to do with that. Not at all. Right? Anyway, Travis goes on to say, like a kid on the playground saying, I know something you don't. I know. Which is why I struggled sharing anything at all last week. But then I started thinking about what announcements DM could make in 2025 to put a smile on my face and a dent in my bank account. Good call. I would be ecstatic with one or two of the below happening this year and then look for an announcement of Martin or Dave writing in late 2025 or 26 with the hopes of recording sometime in 26. An album and tour in 27? I'm convinced they have at least one more record and tour. I took out the obvious ones of a new record and a new tour announcement in 2025. Yes, it has nothing to do with any of that. So those are off limits. So here we go. Mexico shows live Blu-ray, so we can see the performances with the extras they did at all those shows. A complete documentary of them making Memento Mori, planning the tour, and a documentary that was supposedly being done while filming those shows. Number 2, Memento Mori singles box set, including the complete vinyl with the Vinegar Hill sessions and the 4 unreleased tracks. Number 3, non-album singles 12-inch box set. Like You, Shake the Disease is one of my favorite tracks, and the box set seems incomplete without a few of the 12-inch singles not included, like Shake the Disease, It's Called the Heart, Get the Balance Right, Only When I Lose Myself, Martyr, and others. Live in Hamburg, remastered or on Blu-ray or DVD. That's one that I want too. It popped up. I saw actually a decent transfer, but I saw it actually pop up on YouTube the other day. A new singles collection to cover 99 through 23. included in one of the documentaries like they did in the past with new or unseen interviews with the band producers, Daniel Miller, etc. An EP with those 4 unreleased songs and maybe a couple of the Ghost Again remixes we know were done but not released. Interesting. I don't count this as a new record, as these were done during the Memento Mori sessions. I'm sure if I thought about it more, I could come up with more, but this is just off the top of my head after finishing this week's pod. Stay well. Looking forward to announcements coming in 2025. I am too, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you all that information. Thank you so much, Travis, for the email. All right, David Stedman, 2020, writes this. My favorite mix is probably Never Let Me Down Again, the split mix. Sensational. Also, Get the Balance Right combination mix. And Behind the Wheel, Route 66 Casualty mix. Takes me back to 88. Fantastic. Boy, I mean, right now, I mean, just a... my observation is Get the Balance Right, the combination mix. Incredibly popular. David Hudson says, my son recently asked me for 5 favorite Depeche Mode songs, and my reply was, I don't know, I'd have to think about it, but Shake the Disease would be one of them. 88 Strange 88 writes, my guess is that it has to do, speaking of knowledge that I'm privy to, with the release of the recorded Memento Mori tour or the release of the 12-inch box set for Memento Mori. How about on the next podcast, you tell us when you can reveal the news? I do not have a... It's going to go like this. When the news gets out there, I'll tell you that's what it was. I'm sorry. That's really awful of me. I should never have brought it up. I really shouldn't have. But that's how this is going to go. Again, I very much value the individual who shared the information with me. So, I don't want to break their trust. But when whatever comes to light, I'll say, hey, that's exactly what I was talking about. Sherry Bell writes this. Great questions, John. I hope you get to ask those questions one day. I think you will. I especially love the one asking if they know and understand the love their fans have for them and their music. Can you ask, if you dare, if there is a song they would like to do a makeover on? Interesting. If given the chance to do it all over again. Thank you, as always, for the podcast, and I can't wait to hear the tidbit of the news you have for us. Yeah, no, that would be interesting. Is there a song that they would like to go back and have another crack at? Or maybe an album they'd like to go back and record again? Let's see. Dave and Pam Bemveridge. Davey and Pam Bemveridge stripped the Highland mix for their favorite remix. Grey Room says, Hands and Feet mix. Enjoy the Silence is the best remix for me. And then, I believe this is the last email this week. It is. Jameson writes in and says this. Oh man, this is hard. Okay, instead of best, I will say indispensable. Meaning, even when the original comes up in the mix, I kind of wish it was the remix instead, because it's that good. Also, this is off the top of my head, because looking at my Depeche Mode Best Remix playlist would be cheating. I'll stop at my top 3. Number 1, stripped the Highland mix. The build-up. That build-up is perfect. Never Let Me Down Again, the split mix. Need to have that instrumental part, or it just feels like it's not the full experience. Sorry, album version. Barrel of a Gun for number 3. United mix. Ooh, good call. The woman's voice with Dave's, just perfection. Now, is that a woman's voice in the United mix, or is that a tweaking of Dave's voice? I haven't listened to it in a while, and I didn't listen to it before the podcast. But when I think about it, I seem to recall thinking that was Dave's voice and the pitch was messed with. Could be wrong, though. Jameson goes on to say, future questions for everyone. Your favorite remix that really doesn't sound like the original but has its own charm and life of its own. I know many prefer extended mixes over total reworks, but you must have one vastly reworked one that you like. I'll start right now, and my favorite is the In Your Room Apex mix. It sets such a good mood with that Martin vocal sample. Come on. Thanks for the pod, Jameson. I'm going to go with the Higher Love remix that was released with the Trifold Cross multi-disc in your room set that came out, right? That was that. I can't on top of my head, and again, I don't want to be going into my covers right now to get to the track. But there's the Higher Love remix where they speed up the track itself, and I would probably put that one up there. Although when you asked the question, In Your Room, the Apex mix was the one that I had thought of before I even read the rest of your email. So thank you for that, Jameson, and thank you to everybody who has left a email this week. My apologies. I'm kind of all over the place today, aren't I? It's been a long week. I haven't had a nap yet today, and I've been in a bit of a mood, so not the most professional podcast in the world, but I never claimed that it was supposed to be. Never made any promises except that I'm just going to talk about Depeche Mode. Stream of Consciousness, Depeche Mode, the podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for spending this 35 minutes with me. I appreciate it. I hope you come back again next week. Despite what you may have heard on today's show. Listen, if you like to read science fiction, I've written a 7-book science fiction space opera series. It's called EMBARK. It's available on Amazon.com. There's a lot of Depeche Mode references in the story, direct and indirect, while telling an exciting science fiction adventure story. Head on over to Amazon.com and check it out for yourself. I would really appreciate it. Just search for EMBARK, EMBARK, and Jon, Jon Justice. You'll find them all there. An ebook, Kindle Unlimited, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook produced by me. Voiced by me as well, although based off of how I conducted myself during this podcast today, that's probably not a great selling tactic. I look forward to hearing from you, so leave a comment up on YouTube. Just say, hey, what the hell is this? You can also email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Until then, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you're safe. I'll talk to you next week. Bye. Hey, hang on one second.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave